got some people in the Zoom, so it would be a good time to start.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
You might want to speak up a bit,
Okay.
just to make sure everyone can hear.
Okay.
Just project.
Hi, everyone.
Do you want to ask them if they can hear it on there and make sure somebody?
Oh,
Can I?
Yeah.
Hey guys, real quick, anybody that's on the Zoom, can you guys give us a thumbs up or something if you guys can hear Skylar? Okay.
Yes. Do they hear us?
Hey Jen. Hey Molly.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Wonderful.
Okay, we're good.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We're just going to take a minute and have our panelists introduce themselves, and if you guys don't mind, maybe explaining your backgrounds, what you do, and this week's, well, what we're talking about this week is political extremism in the United States. So I'll let you guys take it away.
You go first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
My name is Melissa Hendricks. I actually do not have any per se level of expertise aside from the fact that I am a mother of two. One is a teacher, and I got involved learning about extremism in the United States after school board races across the country started getting taken over by political extremists, and I have a healthy case of ADHD and went down a lot of rabbit holes and found that I had a niche for this, and so for the past 3.5 years I have been studying the rise of both political extremism and Christian nationalism in the United States.
I am Rob Rogers. I do happen to be the first vice chair of the El Paso County Democrats, which is interesting, being a Democrat in El Paso County. I'm originally from Arkansas. I've been tracking the rise of what we now know to be white Christian nationalism since about 2012, based on some election results that happened like in Arkansas. I'm also an Air Force veteran. I always like to mention that in these types of forums because I don't necessarily, usually whenever you think about a veteran, you might have a different type of impression about what a veteran might be focused on. But I am, and I served proudly. After I got out of the military, I started working for a software engineering defense contractor, which I still work for a defense contractor, and I was supporting the U.S. intelligence community with data analytics and visualization for a long time. And that's come in really handy because it's very, very similar to the type of skills that are necessary for tracking extremist organizations, specifically with religious extremism. And much like Melissa, it's whenever we started working together too, we really started taking a deep dive into the infrastructure and function of these organizations as a result of what we saw with school board elections being flipped back in 2021 around the country. And it's just gotten more and more detailed and much more terrifying. So that's me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. And thank you for your service, and thank you for teaching and everything. That's amazing. Okay, so we'll get started with our questions if everyone is ready. And we'll be starting off with, what have been your experiences with challenging extremism in the United States? Whichever one of you like to go first.
We started at the beginning of where we started working together and where it started to get a lot more structured, and that was in 2021. Over the summer of 2021 in El Paso County, and we now know this was happening around the United States, we started seeing heavy dark money influences that were working to flip school boards, and it was money at levels that no one had ever really experienced before. Normally, you would see it would be okay in these local elections. Some people who were passionate about education and kids could pass around some pencils while they were knocking on doors, spend a couple $100 and they get elected to a school board. And then all of a sudden in 2021, that went to $180,000, being dropped into several different school boards in El Paso County specifically. And we thought originally that because this is also where we started seeing all of these labeled nonpartisan but partisan voters' guides that were being put out by evangelical churches in the area. So we thought that there was like some kind of a connection between those things. And we discovered that it actually wasn't. It was and it wasn't. But that's what started opening our eyes to how much influence that the extremist, conservative / evangelical / Christian nationalist organizations actually were. And it's where we started really discovering this thing called the Seven Mountains Mandate, which the Seven Mountains Mandate is based on biblical prophecy that if Christians control each of the 7 spheres of societal influence within a society, that's going to trigger the second coming of Jesus. But that is how they have organized their activities, is around these 7 spheres, government and education being a couple of them. That has opened up, it's opened up a whole world of information, of terrifying information about how these in Colorado, and specifically Colorado Springs and Woodland Park, Colorado, are actually the epicenter. They are the center of this movement. So whether or not anybody realized it, if you're in Colorado, you live in the epicenter of the white Christian nationalist movement. Specifically, it's happening in Colorado Springs and Woodland Park. Ever since then, it's not only opened up a world of information, but it's also opened up a world of contacts and networking. We work with people and talk with people all around the country now about their different experiences, and all of us trying to raise awareness of the very real and critical threat of literal theocracy being imposed, either through extrajudicial means or de facto theocracy, is very, very real, and we are on the precipice of that happening, whether or not people realize it
or accept it.
Wait, can you name the seven
seven
spheres?
Well, it
so
just
people
depends
understand?
on, they've changed it a little bit over time, but the 7 spheres are family, government, military, business, religion, education, and media. Yeah, the entertainment element. And because there's those spheres, and most people just don't try to attribute Christian nationalism thinking in their involvement in government per se, but like Rob said about the involvement in school boards, that money that was coming, that dark money that comes in, those were coming from conservative organizations like the 1776 PAC. They recognized, and have been for the past 35, 40 years, infiltrating and putting themselves in elements of government from local all the way up to the highest echelon. One of the members of the Seven Mountains Mandate, what is called the New Apostolic Reformation, which is a group of Pentecostals, an organization of Pentecostals, started by Peter Wagner, was Paula White. And that was like super concerning when we saw that Paula White was also the spiritual advisor for Trump during his administration. So we had just stepped into seeing dark money in school board races, and then all of a sudden that web became very large, very quickly. And nobody was talking about it. Every tweet that came out was being talked about. We had a lot of national security things going on, all of those things, but nobody was talking about the underlying foundation by which all these things were being built. And it was happening in real time. And now we have legislatures that ascribe to this.
We have the Speaker of the House.
And now the Speaker of the
Mike
House.
Johnson, it recently got a lot of attention that he's got the Appeal to Heaven, the pine tree flag flying outside of his office. First time that I saw that flag was going back to the story I started telling about Arkansas and the elections that happened there. And a state senator in Arkansas named Jason Rapert. And he was being mentored by this guy named Dutch Sheets, who actually lives in Colorado Springs, who was a New Apostolic Reformation leader. And Jason Rapert was always flying this Appeal to Heaven, this pine tree flag. This is back in 2012, whenever he first got elected, and I didn't know what I was looking at the time. So now you fast forward to now, and it's now flying prominently outside Mike Johnson, our current Speaker of the House. And the evangelicals and the Christian nationalists are just going nuts that they have one of their own who is now leading the House of Representatives.
Does this tie in with like the prayer breakfast, that group? This ties in with them as
The
well?
National Prayer Breakfast,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a big web.
Do you know?
Would you mind, just explain what the
You
prayer
guys
breakfast
can,
is?
if you guys want to explain the prayer breakfast. It's almost like a lobbying, like a religious lobbying organization. Like they really support, like.
In a way, yes. Probably, maybe started with the best of intentions. Even some of our more liberal presidents and government has supported it in the past, as you know, the whole aspect and freedom of religion and
Meet them where they're at. type of
yeah,
thing.
but it's actually even bigger than that. There is a multi-million-dollar boys club. I mean, there's women involved, but that's just kind of how they
Yeah.
refer to it, called ZICLAG. It's ZIKLAG. Feel free to look it up. Go down that rabbit hole. You have to have like $25 million to be a part of it, and they meet regularly and talk about how they're going to do exactly what's happening right now.
Almost like ALEC. Like the.
Alec is another one.
That's all,
Yeah.
that's all I
But
connected
like
to.
one's religious, one's more
That's-
legislative.
But that's the thing is that the religious, I kind of look at it, we've talked about this before, if you're looking kind of like a Venn diagram is how these all attach to one another. There is the more conservative side and the money. There's the religious extremism, and then there's like more like this militia arm. And they are now all working together.
It's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected, and they're
Yeah.
working together, and they figured out they used to step on each other's toes, and they realized they weren't getting anywhere, and then they decided to work together, and Project 2025 was born.
And what's Project 2025, if you don't mind? Yeah, like,
A lot of people.
Yeah.
Like this is the Project 2025 is just like recently.
That's
For
what-
these people, they've already known about it, but for the rando person,
Right.
like we're just now starting to hear about it in social media and stuff like that. Like if
Okay.
Trump gets elected,
20
they're gonna implement this Project 2025 thing.
okay.
And in 2025, I mean, it's actually the latest iteration of this playbook or this document to kind of reform the federal government. This is the first time where it actually looks realistic to actually do it. And it's Project 2025 is a playbook. I mean, they published the entire 900-page plus document. Heritage Foundation are the ones that publish it. Heritage Foundation is all connected with this too. There's like so many different paths you can go down with this, but Project 2025 is basically a playbook for restructuring the executive branch of government to place an unprecedented amount of authority and power within the hands of the president specifically. It's a playbook for removing people, and it lays this out too in very stark language that loyalty is more important than pedigree or experience. So it's systematically replacing very key people within the executive branch of government that are loyalists to the conservative cause. So it would put an immense amount of power overnight into the hands of the presidency. And considering that Trump is the front runner, on the Republican side, by far, right now, there's a very real possibility that could be enacted.
And it's anti-LGBTQ, it is, they go on the basis of pro-family, et cetera, values, but it literally lays out a very distinct case for what Rob just said, and they are no longer, this is all being said out loud now, about what their intentions are and what they wanna do.
Now,
So,
if you, so on the discussion of the upcoming presidential election and everything, within this context, what are some of the factors contributing to this rise of extremism? If you could just, I'm sure there's so many, but if you could list your top 5 perhaps that you guys see in your own professional experience and just what you've observed, however you guys want.
the
What's
top 5,
contributing to it?
Yeah, just
Christian nationalism, propaganda, heavy doses of propaganda, legislation being passed by the people who are influenced by this, what we're seeing in Texas, the influence on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Junie Thomas was at a meeting and pushing the 7 spheres.
Jenny Thomas is the head of the Council for National Policy, which that's the umbrella organization for all of this activity.
How do you guys see media playing a role in this right now? That's
The vessel.
Well, I think it's more, it's what's happened is it's unfortunate that media no longer is actually contributing always to the news. It's more sensationalism. It's become a money-making industry, and if they don't get the clicks, they don't get the watches, then it's not. And the sensationalism, the grandeur is what they're looking for. Like I said, the Trump tweets, the look what so-and-so said, look what so-and-so did, not actual news. We just actually had a conversation about this earlier, how I get more information from people on the internet that are considered what are OSINTs, O-S-I-N-T-S, which is open source intelligence. And it is literally reaching out to people within the United States that are studying this in their state, in their, wherever they're at, saying, hey, this is happening, why isn't anybody paying attention, trying to get their local news station to pick it up, and they won't. So instead, we've had to kind of go around those and utilize social media platforms like Rob does, TikToks, Twitter, anything, Instagram, what we can to get this information out there. And we did that for 3.5 years, and we were able to build a network of people that we were seeing this extremism happen in definitely places like Pennsylvania, Texas, Ohio, even California. And when we started networking and talking, we started getting enough of us together that we could actually push it out there. We found journalists that were willing to work with us. And then Mike Johnson, second in line to presidency, was all part of this, and finally the mainstream media picked it up. And now you see the term Seven Mountains Mandate on CNN, MSNBC, and I can't even express to you almost like what a relief it was, because we were so desperate to get this information out to make people understand how serious this is.
Absolutely.
And you're just talking about like the influence too. I mean, and then that's kind of like the current like influences. I think it's also important to like go back in history and think about like how it all started, how this influence like all started. And because there's not enough people that know about this guy and these things either. And that's a guy named Paul Weyrich. If you want to blame someone for the current polarization of politics and extremism that's risen, you can go back in and you can blame that one person. Paul Weyrich was a political influencer back in the 70s, and he was working with Jerry Falwell and others on the Reagan campaign. And Paul Weyrich, there's an interview with him before he died in 2007, where he admits plainly what it is that he did and why, as he was an Orthodox Jew, but he saw that there was no real difference between the two political parties, between the Republicans and Democrats. There was only economic differences. There was no moral differences between them. And they also saw that evangelical Christians were not voting in large numbers. So he needed a way of creating a voting bloc out of them. The way that the moral issue that he created in order to get evangelicals and other Christians to vote in large numbers was abortion. He created abortion as the wedge issue to get people, to get that segment to vote in large numbers. And then it went from there. That's where the polarization and extremism came from, because now we're not talking about policy anymore. We're not talking about economic benefits from a conservative or from liberal side. We're talking about culture war, extremist like issues now. He created all of that. Now he also created the Heritage Foundation, and he created ALEC. So he is the person that all of this came from. And then you fast forward a little bit and you go back. Everybody should go in and watch Pat Buchanan's speech at the 1994 Republican National Convention. And Pat Buchanan was running against George Bush Sr. In the 1994 Republican primary. His speech in 1994 is almost exact, word for word, the same types of things that Republican conservatives are saying now. That's where he brought the extremism to the mainstream in that one, and he lost the primary, but he's the one who brought it there. Everybody needs to go and find that and watch it, because then you see like where it came from. You also see how long it's been going on.
Yeah. Now we talked about like one of the implications is it's no longer focused on policy so much as just more polarizing, dividing topics that
Well, that's their intention, is to distract you with that. There's very much implications of policy being driven by these people. That's what we're trying to prevent. That's what's happening. But the shiny things that they got there, out there for you to see, keep you just on the edge of stuff to fight when you're fighting for the anti-LGBT extremism, when you're fighting school board, nonsense. They can keep you distracted while they're actually doing and enacting very serious policy that's affecting people's lives.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, as a teacher, like interacting, like, do you see any of the implications like happening to children today? Or, like,
So I'm actually not a teacher, my daughter is.
Okay.
But when I got involved initially, it was because I was seeing these things happen. I mean, you see these teachers being threatened, Moms for Liberty groups, these that are tied to things like the Heritage Foundation, trying to implement these family values with this absolute nonsense of infiltrating schools because whatever new thing that they make up for the day, bothered me as a parent to watch that happen. And I also have a special needs child, so I take a particular interest in the fact that during our research, when we saw all of these different things happening, like I told you, there was like the money arm and the Koch Industries, the Heritage Foundation, then there was the Christian nationalist element, then there was this militia arm, all working together. It has always been their intention from back in that day that Rob spoke with Paul Ryrick, etc., to dismantle public education. I mean, it's not a hidden thing that isn't known that they've always wanted to take any three-letter agency out of government. It's always been to reduce, to have small government. Well, then they just started to utilize people that had these similar agendas, and they started to work together. And that's where we're at now.
How do you find people, Ali, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have two questions, and the first one is why it is now? And the second, is there an influence of the rise of far right in the Europe on the United States? Most recently, we do have in Netherlands, the far rights are taking off the government, and they are very hardliners. So is there any interchangeable effect between the United States and Europe, and why it is the rise is happening mostly now?
The reason, I mean, this is anecdotal, and it's probably a little bit of like my opinion, but I think the reason why it's happening now is because this is their last shot. Because Gen Z, Gen A, Gen Z and Gen A are an entirely different animal. They care about each other. They naturally work collaboratively. They have grown up in a world, they're being raised by millennial parents so millennials were told that the world was supposed to be like in a certain way, and then they get out into the world and they find out that it's not that way. And now they're raising Gen Z and Gen A kids. So these Gen A and Gen Z kids they've been raised in a world where their parents were not happy with the world that they were given, and they've been told this from birth. They're entirely a different animal. The right-wing extremism is not going to be nearly as effective on them because of their their value of diversity and inclusion and cooperation in the world. It's not going to work. I think that's why it's happening now, because the Heritage Foundation, Council for National Policy, these people that have been trying to do this for 40 years. It's now or never. If they don't take control, they won't get another shot.
Well, and they had so my theory on it is, and I mean, you can look, I see patterns when I do my research. We don't all have the time. That's the commodity that I do have time, that I have is time. Not everybody has time to sit there and research as much as I do. And you can see patterns. And truthfully, like he said, this has been going on 30, 40 years. They've been attempting the same thing. The Falwells were working with the government at that time. You can look back at all of the different times in history in which they tried to attribute to, we have to bring things back to family values. They always put a name or on it, which really has an underlying tone to it. But truthfully, it was COVID and Trump's presidency. As soon as people were at home and stressed out and their kids were not going back to school, they could insert their propaganda. They could start to see if people would get riled up, and they did. they reached out, they saw, I think that people were very surprised to see how many people would still stand behind Trump despite all the things that he was doing, even working against their better interest. Because even though the man does not care about those individuals whatsoever, they said, oh, he says what I'm thinking. And I have somebody, like that. And Trump did, to your point about it on a more national scale, of course in European locations. As a matter of fact, I was doing some research last night related to that. In Spain, there's the far-right Vox Party. In Germany, there's the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. Italy, the League. Austria, the Freedom Party. France, the National Rally. Estonia, Finland, etc. And then, of course, we also know like Hungary and Viktor Orban. And we have our representatives of our country literally going over and visiting Hungary with Viktor Orban and kind of like looking at their playbook, at what they've been able to accomplish with the anti-immigration policies, the anti-LGBTQ policies, and they're like, hey, we like these guys.
They had CPAC at Hungary in Hungary not too long ago, and one of the reasons that they're kind of aligning that way is because Hungary is supposed to have a very similar system of government as ours. And they've been able to implement, these things in spite of the fact of having very similar types of, it's not exactly, like our Constitution, but it's similar. They've been able to do a lot of these things like in spite of that.
But when your goal is a more nationalistic society, like we keep to our own, they keep to their own, immigration becomes a huge issue. And so they could utilize that when COVID happened and people were home, and they just pushed the propaganda out there quickly and hard. And then there was Trump and his tweets, and next thing you know, these people who had never had interest in politics, probably even rarely voted, were now out. It was just one long political rally. Does anybody remember when we didn't have a Trump rally? They're doing it today. Everything it's now like this propagandized. There's, fireworks in the background. They've made it like a show, and it happens continuously. There's the Great Awakening tour with Michael Flynn. It is just one long show to distract you.
Just to in recruiting, how are these extremist groups recruiting new members? Like specifically, other than the political factors of, how Trump is able to speak to people who originally weren't involved. Do you guys see any specific tactics, media-wise or
Rallies,
yeah,
churches.
I was going to say, it's Christian nationalist extremist pastors recruiting from their churches. I mean, these churches, it's something they criticizing Christianity in the United States in any form, whether or not it's legitimate or not. You get people's brains shut down as soon as you say it. It's only been recently we've been able to talk about the term Christian nationalism without someone in the room, bristling at that. Talk about my faith. 68% of the United States is some form of Christian, so I understand it to a certain extent. But they've used that insulation too to hide themselves and hide a lot of activity. But to your direct point, I love talking about. I don't love the fact that it happened, but I love talking about United in Purpose. Because if it wasn't evil, then I would admire what they did and how effective it was. United in Purpose. Have anybody done any canvassing for Democrats ever?
For you.
So you familiar with Van?
Yes.
Map that you have, for canvassing and that kind of thing. Got a lot of good information right there, on your phone. All the voter data, the different scores and stuff that let you know who to go and target. Okay, imagine that. Imagine Van, but it's populated by church membership rolls that has been enriched through data scientists and that kind of stuff in exactly the same way. That's essentially what United in Purpose was doing. So they were building tools based on pastors and major organizations providing data on church members, just like they do with Van. And then they built tools for pastors to be able to see who in their flock was not registered to vote, what their voting tendencies were, those types of things. They built analytical tools for pastors to be able to do that and recruit.
Rob, Melissa, you need to tell them about when our state rep gave her little educational speech. What was her name?
Stephanie Luck.
Stephanie Luck. When she went to a church on State House dime, on State House on tax money.
It
And
was
was-
during, in her defense, it was during recess, but
Was she getting per diem?
I don't know.
We just
To
know-
drive there? And we were out of her district. We weren't even in this woman's district. And she drove to a church.
Well, she drove to multiple churches in the state of Colorado, and
She
it
just
was,
did it again recently.
yeah, it's part of their agenda to, I mean, if that's part of your base, you know,
She was talking about state policies and like a photo, what are they called? The
Slideshows?
slideshow thing.
so the thing is
Of
that, and
our
that's
state
interesting.
policies in
It
a
was
church.
actually at a church called Church of Briargate. Church of Briargate was
Their
run by a
pastor's now a
pastor.
legislator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pastor Scott Bottoms, who is now one of our state legislators. He ran.
And one.
He invited her there to talk, and I think what I found the most interesting was, as she was talking, she started bringing up things like how ineffective the government is. You know, she's showing you, like, look, they talk for 4 hours, but nothing ever gets done, you know, and she's just trying to rile them up related to things like 2A, protecting your home, and all, and they're going to try to take your guns away. And, you know, you see in church, these people get very angry and, you know, Now, she is a self-described very devout evangelical, and she was saying about how, like, we need to be more involved in politics. We need more people. We need to be out in the community doing betterment, you know, for our society. And these people grumbling and with their MAGA hats on the entire time, until she mentioned, oh, did you know that we have like 80,000 people, or 80,000 children in the foster kids district? And as soon as she said that, you could have heard a pin drop. All of a sudden, no more like, oh yeah, we should be doing that. Oh, and then she mentioned a few other things about how we need to be out there being more biblical, etc. That's not what they were there for. And it was so apparent, and a little depressing and shocking actually when I saw it, because I didn't know, I was there to observe, to see how the constituents of our area would respond to this kind of thing. And when I saw that, I recognized that there are people out there that just want to be mad, and they're being fed that constantly to the point where it's almost an addiction, and when it's not there, they can't find their way out of it, and they know that. So that is why Stephanie goes to those churches and does that.
And that particular church too, I mean, talking about like recruiting and where they're recruiting these people from, Scott Bottoms, he's an extremist, you know, MAGA pastor, and he's now, I mean, he was one of the ones that was causing so many problems, you know, with the process, you know, in the State House, you know, it's right around the corner from here during this previous session. But so, I mean, you can go and like look, I mean, they live stream like all of like this stuff in his sermons are like, they're almost exclusively like political statements, talking about the corruption of the FBI on a Sunday morning, like from the pulpit. It's like that bizarre.
Anti-LGBTQ. Oh my, it's horrible.
Any liberal is a demon.
Yep, horrible. And this is a legislator,
He's a legislator.
in Colorado.
And that's
And,
just local.
and Stephanie Luck, I mean, going back to her, sometime whenever you're like bored, just go and look at her campaign website. So we've already mentioned the 7 Mountains mandate, right? 7 Spheres of Society. I'm not going to tell you anything more other than just go and look at her campaign website and see if you see any similarities. The reason why you would see similarities is because I'd mentioned that El Paso County was one of the epicenters for all of this. Anybody heard of Andrew Womack, Charis Bible College in Woodland Park?
You will.
You will.
Yeah. That's the key to like all of like this is Andrew Womack, Charis Bible College, the Truth and Liberty Coalition. Stephanie Luck went to the Charis Bible College School of Practical Government. So in Woodland Park, there is a hyper-evangelical extremist college there. And they have a School of Practical Government where they train these extremists to go and run and get elected to office.
So is that part of the reason why Colorado Springs is considered the epicenter of this? It's like a testing ground, a proving ground?
No. So,
Okay.
strangely enough, and you go back and research a lot of what happened in the United States, Unfortunately, Colorado is at the center of a lot of it. I mean, a very large portion of it. What he talked about, the Paul Weyrich days, they were working with people specifically, I think you guys probably all heard of Focus on the Family. You know, Colorado Springs didn't have a lot to offer. It didn't have a lot of water, oil, anything. Land was cheap, and so some evangelicals thought, hey, I can buy all this land and I can, you know, start these large, big, you know, tent churches, and we can have this nice little, you know, utopian society. The founder of that was a man by the name of James Dobson. I don't know if you guys remember him from back in the 80s. I don't know if anybody here remembers the 80s in that respect, but him and Dr. Alan Sears, because he was a psychologist, he has a PhD, wrote the book in the 80s related to child spanking and stuff like that. Anywho, he was about the family values guy. He is actually the founder of the ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, which used to be the Alliance Defense Fund. The ADF is the, what would you call it? The legal arm of really Christian nationalism. There are, Mike Johnson was part of the ADF. A lot of ADF are the people who literally went to the Supreme Court for the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The ADF is probably on the legal aspect one of the most dangerous things related to extremism here in the United States. It is a bunch of evangelical, extreme, conservative right, literally out there petitioning and trying everywhere in every pocket to overturn things. That's it.
They got their appropriate Supreme Court in place. So they're actually, and this is actually related to recruiting of people too. It's not just like recruiting like members of extremists, they're recruiting court cases now. They want people to deliberately violate the law from a separation of church and state perspective. They want to introduce, like, you know, they really want to get someone to start praying in school again, so they can get sued and they can take this to the current Supreme Court. And with the current composition of the current Supreme Court, there's a really good chance that they're going to say it's legal. They're going to redefine what the First Amendment means.
They're 100% working.
They're recruiting for court cases, that's really scary.
You think about the cake making case that came out of Colorado
Or the
Central.
new one that just
That was
came out that
deliberate.
was fabricated,
Yeah,
that she didn't even, yeah.
masterpiece cakes or whatever it
No,
was
no,
called.
no, she's
no,
talking
no, the
about the
other one.
website.
The
The-
website one.
But
Yeah.
the first one, masterpiece cake, that was
Yep.
also made up.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was also done deliberately to get a favorable
challenge.
ruling to challenge
Yeah.
it.
But it all stems.
Probably not like what you meant by like recruiting, but it's so important. They're recruiting court cases, recruiting friendly court cases. That's why they wanted to get the Supreme Court stacked the way that they could, because I mean they're on the verge of doing this stuff. I mean, this is what I'm saying, that I'm not being dramatic. I'm not making this up. No one's paying attention. All it's going to take is the right Supreme Court case, and tell me that this current Supreme Court is not going to overturn fundamental, long-term interpretation of the Constitution. It will.
They're already doing it in other states.